Caption Hub does not and is not and will never be a service provider in that respect. What we can do is we can provide hopefully really clear and intuitive tools that people can use on a day-to-day basis in order to do the work they need.
Hey everyone, and welcome to finally a guest episode again at Slater Pod. Here today on the podcast, we welcome Tom Bridges. Tom is the founder and CEO of Caption Hub, an AI-powered collaborative platform for multilingual subtitling, voiceover, and on-screen text localization. Hi, Tom, and thanks so much for joining today.
Hi, Florian. Thank you very much for having me here.
What part of the world, what city, what country are you recording this from today?
I'm currently in Bath in the southwest of the UK.
Southwest of the UK. Last time we met was in the Silicon Valley, so
it was at SlaterCon. Yes,
yeah, that's right.
So it was a great event.
Thank you. So now we're back in our respective part of the world again. So tell us a bit more about your professional background. Like, you shifted originally from a post-production role to multimedia localization. Just tell us a bit of the background, set the scene for the listeners and viewers here.
Absolutely. Well, I started off my career in architectural visualization, as it happens, and that then flowed through into a post-production company, which then flowed into a post-production company. And after the post-production company, it was then motion graphics and visual effects. And it was part of that motion graphics and visual effects journey, particular motion graphics side of things, that led me into the subtitling world. Which was kind of by accident, if I'm being entirely honest, but we were exposed to the problem set of a very large customer who required a lot of localization in a very short amount of time. And we ended up developing a tool, and we licensed that tool to the customer, and that's how Caption Hub was born in the first place.
Oh, interesting. So the original problem we were trying to solve was big customer had kind of a left field problem for you at the time. And you're like, okay, this could be something I can scale with many other customers as well.
Precisely. It was, it was localizing a 5-minute video into, I think, 16 different languages, but managing the entire process overnight. So that was transcription and translation. The video was changing. There were lots of different stakeholders, in multiple, parts of the sign-off. And everything was going back and forth with Excel spreadsheets. So it was kind of crazy. And the workflow almost sort of really offended my sensibilities. It was just so broken. And there's got to be an easier way. And the obvious solution was to have, a single source of truth, and to gate access to that and make it secure, and allow the right people to have the right access at the right time. It was like the people doing the translation had never seen the original video, for instance. So it was just sort of mind-blowing how this kind of process had actually come into existence in the first place. But yeah, we developed a tool, and that tool became Caption Hub.
The spreadsheet is the backbone of the localization industry, has been, and yeah, it has offended my sense of productivity many times in the past also.
The spreadsheet is a great tool, but it just doesn't work when you add in this concept of time, right? The whole point about multimedia is you've got an extra element, and there are lots of things that are very subtitle specific, but that time thing, a spreadsheet has no sense of that.
But originally, were you? Do you have any experience kind of on the developer side or tech side, SaaS side? Or did you just say, well,
no, absolutely
I'm the business guy, let me bring in the developers here? Because obviously it's a technology, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely none. So I had an idea. I'm relatively technical, so I had an idea of the kind of thing that was possible. But no, I'm not a coder, and I can't code. So I had an idea, hired a developer, showed our customer this developer worked for a month. We came up with a proof of concept, showed it to the customer, and the customer loved it, and we ended up licensing it to them 9 months later. And I thought, wow, software's easy. Have an idea, hire a developer, and license it to one of the biggest brands in the world. And I've spent the last decade finding out quite how lucky we were with that initial set of circumstances. But we've gone from that initial sort of point of solving a very specific problem for a very specific customer, based around subtitle localization, and we're now 10 years on with a wider market view.
Tell us a bit about that wider market view in terms of kind of service mix, client segments, geographic footprint, like where's the team, where the client's based typically?
So the wider market view, we realized early on that, we had a product that was based in the cloud, and there are some much, much smarter people than we are, doing amazing things. And so even back in 2016, we were integrating with speech recognition and machine translation. And obviously in recent years, people are doing some amazing things with AI. We realized that that connectivity and integrating with other tools was a really important thing. And then of course, the human in the loop, that's a critical part and something that is very, very important. And so, so we've gone from this point solution to being something that is a true sort of end-to-end multimedia localizations solution, so way beyond subtitles, synthetic voice, live, automating this, and all of the other, the further applications of AI. With respect to to the market that we're playing in, it's a truly global market, really. We have customers from all different geographies. And a whole load of different customer sectors. The bulk of our customer profile is still in the large enterprise, but of course we're doing more and more in broadcast as well, and LSIs are an important market for us.
I want to talk to you about all of these individual components. Also, of course, AI, the enterprise section, also the kind of rise of YouTube creators as potentially big clients. But first, I guess you also went to the IBC conference in Amsterdam, like every year. It's a little bigger than SlaterCon. I wish maybe at some point we were IBC sized. But tell us a bit about the vibe, the mood, like the tech that was there that would be relevant for people in the language industry.
Yeah, as you say, it's on a different scale. It's not quite as big as some of the really big shows in Vegas, but it's definitely up there. The floor space you can measure in acres, really. And AI, as you can imagine, is a really hot topic. We were in the AI tech zone, and we had a huge stand this year. It was bigger than my first flat, and it was a great event. We shipped out the whole team. And there's just a palpable sense of excitement about the possibilities and what's out there. And I think IBC also, just by virtue of its location, in Amsterdam, it's a natural sort of focal point for more sort of international markets, which obviously plays to what we're offering in terms of multimedia localization.
Did you launch Timbra? That's a real-time media localization suite. Just at before IBC, and that was kind of the launch pad, as it were, for that solution? Or?
Yeah, we were introducing Timbra as a concept to the world. In lots of ways, really, it's a repackaging of some of our existing technologies. When you say, live multimedia localization now, there are a whole load of different applications there. And so we started out with something that was, purely based around web broadcasting. We've got some remarkable technology for HLS delivery that is kind of magical. You've got video on demand style subtitling, but on a live video stream. But that's expanded to be, more and more to be a wider offering. So we've got an in-room product, and there are various other sort of things we're working on. So Timbra is the encapsulation of lots of these different related technologies, and that's what we are introducing there. But it's not, what we're announcing wasn't sort of new per se. Lots of what we do is in use by some huge organizations. So Timbra has provided the translated subtitles for Amazon's reInvent or AWS's reInvent conference. That happens on a yearly basis. Oracle's Cloud World, Intel's Foundry events, device launches. So it's already sort of highly production proven. But it was really nice to be able to stand up on stage at IBC. One of our partners and end user, the company called Corivium, their CEO stood up alongside and gave the demo, which was really cool. It was really well received, and it was a privilege to be able to launch it at IBC.
So you mentioned there AWS and what was the other company you mentioned? Also big enterprise.
So Oracle.
Oracle. All right.
Oracle,
So
Intel.
AWS and Oracle. So basically, I was going to ask you that Caption Hub is obviously full enterprise grade, which is just kind of proven by mentioning these giant companies, right? But you're competing in a super busy market. It's gotten way busier than, let's say, seven or 8 years ago, right? With hundreds of maybe lower end products, right? People are just kind of putting things together on top of some AI and basically have a slick marketing pitch. How do you differentiate currently, having something that's super deep against much shallower kind of potential rivals in the lead gen process, not once you get in front of the customer and RFPs and everything, but maybe at the top end of the funnel?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, and I guess if a customer is looking for a pure point solution, then in lots of ways we don't really compete. As you've said, we play in the enterprise space, and we offer a full spectrum of tools, across that multimedia localization, problem set. And one of the great advantages about being AI agnostic, which we are, is that we can integrate into the people who are creating these amazing foundational models, and we can offer our customers a curated but best of breed choice of technology that they use inside of their workflows. So, and as I said, if a customer's after a sort of pure point solution, then we don't really tend to compete on that level. If they're after a platform to manage the entirety of their multimedia localization operation, there's really not a great deal of choice that they have out there. And the enterprise, of course, has got very different needs to the consumer or prosumer space, particularly around security, in terms of audit trails, in terms of everything else that the custom contracting, for instance. We offer all of that, and all of the various certifications. So I hope that answers the question.
It did. Let's go a little bit, start touching on AI. So you guys are offering obviously AI speech recognition, AI translation, synthetic voice, but you also mentioned before even the kind of expert in the loop component, expert in the loop workflows. Now, who offers that? Are you guys offering this? Are you basically plugging in third parties and you're the tech provider only, or how does that work?
We're the platform. We're the glue, if you like, that holds it all together. Caption Hub does not and is not and will never be, a service provider in that respect. What we can do is we can provide, hopefully, really clear and intuitive tools that people can use on a day-to-day basis in order to do the work they need. And how much human in the loop involvement is entirely up to our customers, and what shape that takes is entirely up to our customers. So if our customers want, if they've got sort of small teams and they, who they want to direct towards, a particular video, that they can do that. But they can also go up to, having a multi-vendor strategy inside of Caption Hub. So you can, have different organizations sign off different stages of videos, and of course everything in between. One of our long-standing customers is TED. TED have over 70,000 users on the Caption Hub platform, and they're using that in an entirely sort of self-managing way, to manage a multi-stage, approval process. So there are lots of different ways of managing the human in the loop. Caption Hub, at Caption Hub, we leave that down to our customers, but we provide the tools to be able to make this happen. And I think one of the interesting things as well is, I talked about our three pillars earlier on. The AI, the connectivity, and those human in the loop processes. I think one of the unique strengths that we have at Caption Hub is the ability to automate between all of those things. So, with a single command, you can send a video to Caption Hub. You can have it transcribed with, your own glossaries, your own custom dictionaries. You can then, route that to your internal team or through multiple vendor steps. And then once you've got that back, on approval, you can then generate translations. You can generate translations with different machine translation providers, different term bases. Again, sort of optimizing the AI. But again, if you need the human in the loop processes, you can do that too. And then once those have been approved, then you can, automate the delivery of, the final product, and whether that's, voiceover tracks going to a video platform, or whether that's burnt in subtitles going to an S3 bucket, or whether that's captions being published to YouTube. There are all sorts of different things you can do, and you can do that with a single API call, and that's massively powerful, and it's really massively scalable as well.
Have you seen a dramatic shift in terms of maybe less demand for human in the loop in the past, let's say 18 months, or is it kind of steady, or does it correlate with volume? Or
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it very much depends on the content type, and I think there are some kinds of content where having an entirely automated process is just fine and completely appropriate. One of our customers a few years ago wanted us to localize their back catalog of videos. Now, someone else had done all of the transcription, so we were able just, with spending 5 minutes in Caption Hub, to set up an automation that when they tagged their videos in the video platform, they got ingested into Caption Hub. And Caption Hub ingested those videos, pulled in the transcription that was already there, translated it, true sentence level translation, leveraging best of breed AI, and then sent captions back, sent translated subtitles back to the video platform. And they had 3,500 videos. They added a tag to 3,500 videos. 48 hours later, they had 250,000 minutes of subtitling done for them. And that's an entirely automated way. So that's, and for some kinds of content, that's absolutely fine. For other kinds of content, tier one marketing, you'll always need that human in the loop process.
Let's talk about a couple kind of segments, market segments. Maybe I want to talk about YouTube and the creator side, and maybe major kind of feature films, and then move on to the broadcasting space where you're super strong in, right? So what are your thoughts about YouTube now allowing big creators, or even smaller creators like Slater? We could now upload our multilingual audio tracks. Do you think that's kind of a big unlock for AI dubbing, or is it maybe a little bit less of a big deal? I just keep thinking it's a huge deal, and it should unlock a ton of latent demand, as it were.
I think it's really interesting, and I think the fact that companies like Google are offering this is shows that there's demand out there, and perhaps it's demand that a lot of people didn't know they had until they had the tools put in front of them. And in terms of we're not trying to compete with YouTube. Auto captions have been around on YouTube for a really long time. They're fine. I haven't done too much. I haven't had too much experience with the synthetic dubs in YouTube, but I'm sure to a certain level it's fine. I think where Caption Hub comes in is when people need that last bit of control, but all of the other things that I've talked about earlier in terms of what an enterprise might need. But by the same process, by the same token, if what you get out of YouTube is good for your needs, then honestly, I think that's something to be celebrated.
I mean, yeah, the DI dubs that YouTube has kind of integrated their own solutions really bad. I can tell you that. but now they're so bad that they must have accelerated the launch of basically you being able to upload your own dubs, and that's what's there now, right? So
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's available now, and that's something we'll be integrating with quite soon. The ability to send a Caption Hub voiceover to YouTube. We already have a YouTube connector in place.
Yeah, that should be a pretty big on-ramp. Are you guys at all in the kind of major feature film space? Like, I don't know, the Hollywood, the world of Hollywood and related big feature
Not
films?
so much. No. So some of our customers do use us for episodic content. We're not used for feature films at this point in time. The enterprise market and the broadcast market have very, very different needs. Honestly, where we're focusing most of our efforts for the broadcast market, despite the fact that Caption Hub is a fully frame accurate platform, can absolutely be used for episodic TV. But where we're seeing most traction at the moment is in our live subtitling offerings with Timbra.
It's so interesting that the live space. So the broadcasting and live market, what's kind of the hardest technical challenge? Live seems just generally very hard.
It is, and it's hard in sort of in different ways as well. Not just from a technical level, but at an organizational level, being able to provide the level of support that large organizations need. They've invested tens of millions of dollars in their events sometimes, and they, nothing is left to chance. So it's a very difficult problem to understand and and therefore to solve. And I think part of the issue with live is that there are a whole load of different use cases for it. As I sort of alluded to earlier, I was saying Timbra is a collection of tools in lots of ways. There are lots of different ways of people generating and consuming live video and live audio for that matter as well. I think something that sort of stood us in really good stead though is that appreciation of what good captioning looks like. At Caption Hub, we've got a bunch of algorithms, for instance, that take, if you were to just upload a video on demand asset to the Caption Hub platform and transcribe, we send audio off to a speech recognition provider. And then we get a big transcript back from that speech recognition provider, and then turn that into captions that a human would have created. And this is core technology to us, and it's kind of much harder than it sounds. You've got to pay attention to where cuts are in the footage. You've got to pay attention to grammar, to subtitle constraints, so characters, character limits, reading speed, that kind of thing. And so we'd gone to a great deal of trouble to develop this for our video on demand side of things, but we can reuse all of that R&D, for live as well. And so that's what I was talking about with Timbra and the RHLS product. You're getting genuinely video on demand, quality captioning, but in a live sense, and that's where our sort of our localization and subtitling heritage has stood us in really good stead as we move into live.
I want to run something by you. So I went to the AWS summit here in Zurich, and I visited their, what was it, media and entertainment booth, like the actual not a partner booth, but the AWS's media and entertainment booth, and they had this kind of complex diagram of like a hyper personalized live broadcasting experience where, like, in Formula One, you'd see like a custom, like basically a localized custom ad on top of a bridge, but like it's an actual like bridge that the Formula One cars would pass. But you'd see a different ad than the person sitting in Dubai or the person sitting in, I don't know, Korea. Like, I don't know, is this something that like you're thinking about as well, like being like integrated as part of, a much bigger kind of hyperscaler platform, providing a niche technology component of it? I mean, I hope I'm not butchering the idea here, but it was a complex enough diagram.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is what I find so exciting about the space, right? But what you're talking about absolutely plays into that connectivity side of things. We want Caption Hub is a component you can integrate into different workflows, and that's already the case for VOD, but it's increasingly the case for live as well. There's we can already see people who want to integrate Timber into their own iOS apps, for instance. We've got all of the toolkits to enable our customers to do that. The other thing that's worth mentioning here is that Caption Hub, we launched Caption Hub Connect about this time last year, and with Caption Hub Connect, we're linking service providers and consumers inside of the Caption Hub platform itself. And so this is how we manage our sort of multi-vendor workflows for our customers. They've got an account inside of Caption Hub, and we can route information and allow people to collaborate across different teams inside of Caption Hub, and we can automate that process.
Kind of a marketplace idea.
Kind of a marketplace. Yeah, exactly.
There you go. So basically, LSIs and LTPs can come to you, knock on your door, and see if there's something to be done there.
Absolutely.
So with all this like super fast progress in AI, if I was building a software, like where do you even begin to prioritize? Like what do you say? Okay, this is something we actually want to understand a little more deeply, and this is something we're just kind of connecting to some type of API or connect somehow to a third party platform. How do you prioritize that?
It's a really good question, and there's often a temptation to try and do everything all of the time. I think one of the things that I'm always incredibly grateful for are our customers, who are without hyperbole, they're the best in the world at what they do. And I think part of what has made Caption Hub a success is our ability to listen to our customers. We certainly don't implement everything that we get asked to do, but we are able to listen to our customers and to work out what a consensus is of tools that would be useful inside of the platform, and then we go ahead and build it, and then we get feedback on what it's like, and we improve and refine, and and that's good for everyone. It makes the Caption Hub product better. It delivers our users something that they've been asking for, and it ultimately deepens a partnership and keeps Caption Hub sticky. And so lots of the initiatives that we do are at the behest of our customers. Obviously we're looking at wider trends, and there's big intersection in those two things as well. We've got a technology partnership in place with a company called Synapse, who do AI generated sign language. That's something that's going to be bearing fruit very soon. And we're also looking at integrating lip sync technology into the platform as well. So, which obviously complements what we're doing with synthetic voice very well.
Yeah, we had Synapse at SlaterCon London, and we had lip sync company at SlaterCon Silicon Valley. So you combine the two. Here you go. All right.
Exactly.
So the European Accessibility Act 2025. What's your take on it in terms of kind of being a demand driver for all kinds of things like caption, subtitles, sign language? Are you seeing an impact? Was it kind of baked in by the time it came into force, or?
As ever, it's a little bit of both. I mean, it's one of those things that people are aware of and think, oh gosh, we're going to do something about it. And now they're seeing, actually, big fines being issued.
Really? Okay.
Or at least, there are threats of fines. And there are a few, big retailers who, they've been given formal warnings for non-compliance. Going back to the fundamental thing about the European Accessibility Act, from our point of view, it very much aligns with who we are as a company. The accessibility part is a really key part of what we do at Caption Hub, and fundamentally we are helping enable communication, and that's really important to us, and that will always be part of our mission. But with my business hat on, it's also a growth driver, and it definitely has been, and I'm sure will continue to be so. When there are serious consequences for companies who don't meet their requirements under the Act.
if you see a story somewhere, just send us an email. If we miss it, we really want to cover that. I think that'd be like if somebody actually does get fined or somebody does get a slap on the wrist for not implementing it. So let's paint a little bit of a vision for the futures. For your roadmap initiatives heading into 2026. Where do you see this all going? What are some of the things you're working on, if you can disclose? Where do you see clients asking for things?
Yeah, so I've already talked about lip sync and sign language. These are important capabilities, and we're looking forward to getting those into the hands of our customers. There's, as you'd expect as well, we're doing more and more with large language models, but large language models in a way that is very, very specific to the captioning workflow. One of the things that we struggle with, in the world of captions and subtitles, is the fact that a caption is an important unit, but it doesn't have any sort of linguistic sense, or often doesn't have any linguistic sense. You'll have a caption, or multiple captions can constitute a sentence, and so there's a big sort of tension between those. And for solving for sentence level translation is a tricky thing to do, and something that we've managed. But let's say this sentence is too long. How do we summarize that in a way that ripples over 3 captions, for instance? How do we how can we leverage the kinds of great tooling you're seeing in modern CAT tools nowadays, but how do we apply this in a way that makes sense to the caption world? And we've got some ideas, and it's a really interesting area of research, and you'll be seeing some of that soon. A really interesting space at the moment. You covered this, with the AirPods and the live translation, but is the speech to speech. Going from speech recognition through machine translation back out into synthetic voice. You'll be seeing more and more of that, and there's that's a very, very fast moving field, and
incredible.
There are some really, really interesting applications there. And then lastly, we'll be sort of doubling down on our 3 pillars strategy. So more connectivity and more AI generally. But hopefully that gives you a flavor of some of the things that are in the labs at the moment.
We'll check back in. SlaterCon London, May 2026.
Yes,
hope to see you there. Thank you so much, Tom. Thanks for taking the time today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.